Hello, everyone, and welcome to Alta Live. I am so happy to see you here today, joining today's discussion on San Francisco icon Carol Doda and the man behind the topless scenes who made her famous. My name is Jessica Blau. I'm Alta's associate editor, subbing in for Beth Spotswood today. She'll be back soon, but I'm so excited to be here today with our lovely guests, who I'll go ahead and introduce. Jack Boulware was a co-founder and executive director of San Francisco's Litquake Literary Festival. He's currently working on a novel based on his experiences as a travel journalist and posts twice weekly at his Substack newsletter, What Jack Boulware Fails to Realize. Jonathan Parker is a writer, director, producer, musician, and composer who's currently based in San Rafael. Parker's first feature film, Bartleby, was the opening night selection at the New Directors New Films Festival at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And Parker's film, Untitled, has also won a number of prizes, and his film, The Architect, was an official selection at the Vancouver, Seoul, Rio de Janeiro, Houston, and Mill Valley Film Festivals. And Marlo McKenzie is the producer of Butterfly Town, USA and Standing on Sacred Ground. Marlo is also the director of My Secret Country, which just had its world premiere at the San Francisco Documentary Festival this weekend, I believe, at the Roxy Theater. Congratulations. And Marlo has lived in Detroit, Germany, France, and Australia, and now finds a home as a producer and director in San Francisco. And last but certainly not least, this event today is going to be moderated by my colleague, Alta Journal senior editor, Matt Haber. Before we begin with our programming, some brief housekeeping. Alta Live is a digital interview series we do here at Alta Journal. If you are unfamiliar with Alta, we are an award-winning quarterly magazine. Here's the print magazine and website focused on California and the West. You can join us as a member for as little as $3 a month and support the work that we do, including our monthly California Book Club, which is free and very fun to join, as well as presenting events like the one today. If you haven't yet joined Alta as a member and you've been considering it, I really encourage you to join us. Thank you in advance if you're up for it today. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask questions for our guests. Matt will chat with our guests for about 30 minutes, and then we'll get to as many of your questions as we can. This will all be recorded and posted online to altaonline.com later today. We will also send you an email with a link to the video, Alta, and invites to upcoming events. With that, it's so good to be here in community today with all of you. Let's see where everyone is. I'm zooming in from San Francisco today. Matt, where are you zooming in from?
Greetings from Oakland, where it is hot.
Jonathan, where are you?
I'm in San Rafael in air conditioning.
And Marlo, how about you?
I'm in San Rafael, not in air conditioning.
Oh, no. And Jack, what about you?
I am in Forest Knolls, sans air conditioning.
Ah, okay. Well, good to know what everyone's air conditioning is.
It's going to be a scorching conversation.
Well, with that, I'm going to disappear for a bit and leave the floor to Matt.
Thank you, Jess. Well, welcome everybody. I'm really excited to talk about Carol Doda and whom the person we're describing as the man behind her, Big Davey Rosenberg. Let me first start with Jack, since we worked on the Alta piece together, and then we're going to open out to talk about your documentary about Carol Doda. So Jack, give us a little bit of a rundown about Big Davey and what you wrote about him for Alta Online.
Well, Big Davey was a figure that really caught my eye in their documentary. And he was the press agent for Carol Doda and the Condor and a number of topless clubs in San Francisco during that era. And I always wondered what happened to him. So I went on a deep dive, interviewed some people, read a lot of very strange press releases and articles that he was a part of in his career. And yeah, he seemed like a press agent from another era. You know, he was 400 pounds, he had a big cigar. He, you know, sort of unabashedly dealt in this sort of underworld of San Francisco. You know, he was a local kid. He kind of dropped out of college. He wasn't sure what he wanted to do. And what he ended up doing was he achieved success, if you could, think of it that way, in promoting Carol Doda as the first topless dancer in the United States. And Davey was quoted all over the media, international, national media, as being the father of topless.
So let's open it up to our filmmakers. And for those who don't know, tell us who Carol was and why there's a whole documentary about her and why she was worldwide famous.
You want to take that one, Marlo?
Sure. Carol Doda in 1964, she wore a famous monokini designed by a fashion designer, Rudy Gurnick, and she came down on a baby white grand piano. And the monokini happens to be cut out, so the breasts are exposed. And this was the first time that someone had performed in this manner in a club with the breasts exposed. And so it kind of like set off this big moment, and people followed after that. And it was because of her action and her courage that, conversations around nudity that we're having now are still happening. And so she was the first to entertain topless.
And so, as Jack showed in the piece, Davey Rosenberg was part of the brain trust that kind of thought about putting this big monokini on her and encouraged her to perform topless. He also claims credit for the piano that came down from the ceiling. How much of the myth of Carol Doda, or the origin story, do you think was shaped by Davey and his crew, and how much of it is just kind of happened?
Well, as Pete Mattioli, one of the original club owners, who's still around, says that everything was Davey's idea. And he did, apparently decide that, the clubs were all competing with each other. And Carol was a cocktail waitress, but she was dancing all over the floor of the Condor. And eventually she became a performer. People said, get up on the stage, but there wasn't any room on the stage. They had live music. They had really popular bands at that time. And in 1964 on Broadway Street, that was the nightclub area in San Francisco, and it was like the off-season Vegas. And so they said, well, no, there's no room on the stage, get on the piano. So she started this kind of a thing where she would dance on pianos. And then Davey had the idea, we should have the piano, we should mount it on the ceiling of the club and have it descend from the ceiling with her dancing on top of it. So that was their first stunt. And then they were later looking for trying to get convention business in to the club, because there was a big convention arriving at the Cow Palace in 1964. It was the Republican National Convention, where they were selecting Barry Goldwater to be their nominee. And
A real fun-loving crew, probably.
Yeah, the life of the party, definitely. And and it was simultaneous with, as Marla was mentioning, this topless bathing suit hitting the market. So Davey bought one. They talked Carol into wearing it, and it really was a sensation.
And so let's talk about another idea that Davey took credit for. Jack, tell me, and you guys go into this deeply in the documentary, but tell me about the silicone injections and how effective they were, but also, looking back, how potentially dangerous they were for Carol.
Well, supposedly there was a doctor in San Francisco, Vincent Spano. We know his name, and Davey apparently was the person who suggested, Carol, your breasts are very small in comparison to some of the other dancers on Broadway. Perhaps you should see this doctor. And it's a very barbaric procedure when you think about it today. Just a needle going right into the skin and injecting silicone, goo in a way, and then it, of course,
right. No bag holding it. It's in the body.
Right, just in the body. And there's a lot of bruising. They have to put on a lot of makeup. All the dancers did, and I can't imagine it was not a health sort of situation for all of those people later on in life.
Yeah, as you show in the documentary, it created a sensation, right? But it also created kind of an arms race in North Beach.
Well, I think you're talking about what Judy Mambu says in the documentary. She was the second person to go topless on North Beach. Yeah, her and Carol, she talks about in the film, they had kind of a competition of like who's going to be bigger when they went to the doctor. But yeah, I mean, ultimately they decided to do this for their career. And definitely in Carol's case, her career is what brought her joy. And so they decided that this was worth what you just called barbaric, Jack. So and it seems like it definitely was for Carol. She was able to do what she loved.
So let's talk about the relationship between Davey and Carol. It seems like they helped one another achieve some of their goals. There was kind of a symbiosis. In your archival research for the documentary, what sort of stuff did you encounter about Davey? And then maybe we can just talk about him as a kind of a strange mid-century character in San Francisco.
Yeah, he was definitely a loud guy. I mean, he was a publicist, so I guess that's a useful tool. But many people described him as very loud and talking all the time. And you know, a lot of people held him responsible for, in a kind of a negative way, you know, coaxing Carol into doing this with the silicone injections. You know, this was as we talk about in the documentary, it was a technique that was being done in Japan, and you know, it was migrating over to the U.S. And I guess he found out about it, and this Dr. Spano was kind of the go-to guy for that. And but it was, you know, obviously nobody had done this kind of thing before. Obviously risky, but you know, these two women, Carol and Judy, you know, this was their money, this was their career, and I think it's safe to say that neither one of them would have had the career they had had they not you know, undergone this process. And you know, sometimes in particularly in Judy's case, you know, to tragic results.
And we were going to touch upon this at some point, but it sort of attracted journalists from all over the world. It attracted, you know, newscasters, and one of those was Tom Wolfe, whom Jack quotes at length in the piece, who wrote a pretty wacky piece about visiting the Condor and meeting Carol. Jack, do you want to describe that a little bit? And also just like, what about this moment was drawing all these people to observe this and write about it?
Well, you know, the East Coast always wonders what the West Coast is up to. And Tom Wolfe had been coming out to the West Coast to write about, you know, car culture in Southern California, and, you know, some other pieces. He actually wrote a really interesting sort of description of a unemployment office in San Francisco that was pretty famous.
But a bit less sexy than this story, I would say, but yeah.
Fairly less sexy, right? So yeah, he drops by the Condor and describes Carol and, you know, the scene to the breathless readers of New York, where he was based. And this was sort of in the height of the Tom Wolfe new journalism, sort of inventive punctuation, inventive sort of words hyphenated and crammed together. And I found like a ridiculous sort of paragraph that he had come up with to describe what Carol Doda's breasts look like. And
I advise you to go to Alta Online and read Jack's piece just for that. I mean, it's a great piece, but also that it's kind of the literary equivalent of that wolf that goes awooga. I mean, it's like, you know, you could see his tongue falling onto the typewriter as he writes it, and that Carol seemed to inspire that from a lot of people. If you could talk about the doc a little bit, I mean, there just seems like people lost their minds about her in a bit.
Oh, well, I mean, what comes to mind for me is not so much that part of it, but what I really think was drawing people to her was her disarming personality, and that was so rooted in comedy. And if you watch the movie, she's just like really intelligent with one-liners and quips that I could never think of, and she disarmed people that way. She put them at ease. So, you know, she's a beautiful woman, and then she has, you know, injected silicone into her breast, so she's become you know, quite large, and that's another thing. But also she's kind of saying, hey, you know, let's just have fun and let's just relax and let's celebrate sexuality. And so for me, that was like a huge part of what her draw was.
Yeah, she didn't seem to take herself all that seriously, and was really good with a one-liner, a little side-eye kind of joke. I wonder, when you were selecting clips for the doc, was there just some amazing stuff that you couldn't fit in that she was Just too much good footage of her out there?
No, I actually it was the opposite. We had a very difficult time finding footage of her, particularly footage of her performing at the Condor, and so we used almost everything that we could find.
Every part of the Condor got used in this one. And so let's try to put it a little bit in context. We're talking about the early to mid 60s here. Your doc did a really good job showing a bridge that was built from that world to kind of the Summer of Love world to the sexual revolution. And give us a sense of Carol as an important figure in kind of the changing mores of America in the middle of the century. It's open to anybody who wants to grab it.
Well, I
put on your big thinking cap on that one. That's okay.
My big thinking cap. Well, to me, it's like at that time there was definitely this kind of repression, and even today there's a certain level of it in America. And for her to do what she did and just say, I'm gonna perform nude like 10 times a day, and I'm gonna say, I'm gonna be comfortable in my body. And that was a really big thing. Even today, to do that is a very big thing. So she really, like Wednesday Martin says in the film, she changed our ideas about nudity. And I think that's like one of her great gifts to our culture. And who knows how that, impacted women of the sexual revolution who came along, and the hippies were in the parks, like going bare-breasted as hippies. So I don't know, but it's definitely a big part of her legacy.
I think also one thing that sorry to cut you off, but the one thing that she and Davey have in common is they're both shameless in their own way. And I think we see that in the culture now, that if you're bold and you don't take the criticism in and you just kind of go through, you could go very far, possibly to the White House, but also to, Hollywood and beyond and the internet. But sorry, you were going to say.
Well, I was going to say that she was really at the forefront of the sexual revolution and its various incarnations after that. But just to your last comment, though, I would not describe Carol as shameless. Davey definitely, but Carol was, off stage. She was, quite, conservative in her manner. She really, during the bulk of her career, she was not. She didn't drink, she didn't take drugs, and she was really quite. She kind of had a vision of herself almost as a kind of a Grace Kelly character in a weird way, and so she was quite composed and almost with a certain level of formality. So she was definitely not shameless, and she did not think anything she was doing would have been considered shameful, but she was quite, proud of her career and, not shameless at all.
Well, I take that back, but we should note, Jonathan, you told us before we started that you knew Carol a bit. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your personal experience with her?
Yeah, I met her when she retired from dancing, and she opened up a lingerie store on Union Street. And my office overlooked the courtyard where her shop was, and she was very famous. This was in the mid 90s, late 90s, and I was an aspiring filmmaker at the time, and so I started to hang out with her, and eventually we got along pretty well, and I proposed doing a movie about her life. And she was pretty game. She let me follow her around to various master of ceremonies, public appearance gigs she had, and she was singing in a little jazz combo at the time. I sat in with her on a couple of gigs, and so we got pretty far into the project. I had written a bunch of material. It wasn't going to be a doc; it was going to be a narrative film. And eventually, though, it did not come together, and I just put all my notes in a file in my office, and 20 years later, Marlo and I were working together on a different project, and she discovered my file and became intrigued by this person she had never heard of.
Oh, so Marlo, you were not like a long-standing curious person about Carol. Like this was a kind of a relatively recent discovery for you?
Oh yeah, I had never heard of her actually.
Okay.
So when I read Jonathan's notes, I was like, who is this? And and it was a fiction project, so it was like maybe a little extra interesting in the way it was written. And so But what was
It was enhanced, as you might say.
yeah, exactly. It was somewhat enhanced, and but the timing was really interesting, and we had just kind of come out of the end of the Me Too moment that had been big, and so I think it jumped out at me a little more than it might have if it were not for that. So, and then obviously when you look her up, there are so many things to be interested in.
I think the mention of Me Too makes me think of Jack's piece, and maybe people were shading their memories, but as sleazy as that world was, Jack, it didn't seem like there was a lot of, casting couch, quid pro quo kind of stuff, unless we're just naive and we didn't see it. What do you think?
Well, unless I didn't include it. I mean, certainly some people, there was sort of an orgy room below the Condor.
Oh,
that
I could have used that for traffic to the story.
Pete was very proud of telling me all of this. Anyway, so that kind of stuff, happened.
But it was 1965. There were orgy rooms under a lot of businesses, so.
Yeah, or pretty soon thereafter. I mean, I knew Carol a little bit, but when I first moved to San Francisco in 1983, it wasn't long after I moved here that suddenly a guy was killed on the piano at the Condor, and it was front page news all over San Francisco. And so all of us learned, oh my gosh, the Condor, Carol Doda, the lights were still blinking, her nipples were still blinking, the sign at the time on Broadway. And so, you'd read Hurricane and sort of, you understood, even though, I missed all of that era, that she had been, an internationally famous person, and Herb Caen was still writing her up, and
yeah,
it was a big deal. Sad for the guy who died, but
Which you guys, you talk about that in the doc a little bit. There's that element of it. I wonder how that fits in with the story of the Condor. Is that just a bizarre anomaly, or was the Condor a little less innocent than we thought? Now that I know there's an orgy room underneath, especially.
Well, the guy who died, I mean, that was as we do tell the story in the doc, it wasn't exactly related to the Condor, but it's emblematic of kind of the end or the soon to be end of the whole topless era, because we trace this kind of arc in the film where she starts dancing topless in 1964. It's before the Summer of Love, it's before the hippie movement, but it's the starting of that, and the free speech movement was starting at Cal at that time. And there was a general kind of uprising of a younger generation, and there was a lot of optimism, and like one of the dancers in our movie says, it was a very innocent thing at that time, to be dancing topless at that era. But then, as things progressed, the porn industry came in the 70s, and San Francisco was a center of that with the Mitchell brothers and their classic Behind the Green Door, and the tenor started to change, and the clubs on Broadway started to change, which we get into in the doc. And eventually, the drugs got harder, the crowd got rougher, and so the guy dying on the piano, even though it wasn't exactly related, it was a kind of a symbol of the end of an era, almost like you could trace from Woodstock to Altamont.
It's a short era, but yeah, I see what you're saying for sure. I implore the viewers here to watch the doc. It's really great, and you really you get a sense of that period, and then you also get commentators from the present really helping to put it in context. It's really great, and I also still think everyone should come to Alta Online and read Jack's story. Subscribe if you have to; it's worth it. I want to thank you both, all of you, three of you. I think we're going to bring Jess back in and get questions from the audience. So see the doc, read Jack's piece, and take it away, Jess.
Absolutely. And thank you, everyone. Please feel free to continue adding questions in the Q&A if you have any for our audience members. We have an email question from Bob, which I believe Matt touched on this, but didn't quite get to this question. Did Tom Wolfe's writing on Miss Doda in Pump House Gang play any role in your info gathering on her life and career? I believe that's to Jonathan and Marlo. So specifically Pump House Gang.
I mean, I remember reading that. I remember trying to read it. I didn't get through it actually, just for that quote. But that was the extent of how it impacted things. I don't know. Did you contemplate it more, Jonathan?
Well, I read I read his writing on Carol, and it doesn't fit it doesn't fall in our movie in any way. So, yeah.
Another question for you. We've talked a little bit about Doda's impact in San Francisco coming out of that, but what do you think it was about San Francisco that made it right for Carol Doda and for Big Davey at the time? How was the culture right for that moment?
Well, San Francisco has a very long tradition of sexual freedom, tolerance for a lot of different lifestyles that are not standard, and it developed that as far back as the gold rush. San Francisco has a very unique startup history. It had about 200 people, trading hides, and then 10 months later, it had 30,000 men from all over the world, and then obviously it developed quickly with a sex worker industry to take care of that population. And so the Barbary Coast is actually only like one block down the hill from Broadway Street, where the topless clubs were. So I think that for whatever reason, that's one of the reasons, but it has been a kind of a long-standing succession of people expressing their sexual freedom.
Great. In addition to that, you were talking about, I believe, having a kind of a narrative idea, or a narrative idea for a film before deciding to make a documentary. One of our audience members asks, are there any plans to create a kind of biopic about Carol Doda or some kind of more fictionalized tale? Any plans that you've heard of?
Well, we are actually planning a TV series. We have so much material and research that we did for this movie that it could easily contain a TV series. And so we're working on pitching that. And there are just so many stories that we wish we could have gone into, like Judy and Jimmy Mamu, especially. When you watch the documentary, they're both so charismatic, and when you get into their story alone, it's just incredible what they went through as a couple in the 60s, and hiding their marriage because of harassment, because she's white and he's black, and the things that you could bring up in a TV series and the issues you could address and talk about are wonderful. So that's something we envision, and we're working on.
I can't wait, but you cannot leave Big Davey out. That is a good role. It's a juicy role.
We would never leave him out. Yeah, there's another famous character that we had in the documentary, but then we took back out because it was just too much. She needed her own documentary, but she would figure very prominently in a TV series, and that's Margot St. James, who was originally formed the union for sex workers called Coyote, and became a very famous advocate for sex worker rights.
I just keep hearing stories that I want to assign Jack to write now. I want you to do that one.
Write about Margot.
I have.
Oh,
I have read about Margot. When I was writing regularly for the SF Weekly, I went on a cruise, a sailing ship cruise with Margot St. James and a bunch of tech workers from like Adobe or something, and told her story through that. And
Love Boat 2.0.
It was, and I bumped into her quite a bit. I hung out at her house once, and I was researching my first book about the sexual revolution, and I'm in Margot's apartment, and she says, have you talked to the guy who invented the waterbed? And I said, no. And she goes, hang on, and goes to a Rolodex, and within like a minute, I'm talking with the guy who invented the waterbed. I mean, she just knew everybody. It was fascinating. Great.
Okay, you got the assignment. We'll talk about it after.
That's amazing. I will try to hunt down that story and include it in the links that we're going to send our many listeners and viewers after this. We will also be sending as a reminder, the entire recording of this video, as well as links for where to watch the documentary. We are just about out of time, so I just want to thank our panelists and also thank everyone who tuned in today. Join us next week when we invite Victoria Patterson and David Kippen to talk about the unlikely friendships they've formed in the basement of the Huntington Library in San Marino, California. A big thank you to Jack, Jonathan, Marlo, and Matt, and of course to all of you for attending. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great week and stay safe. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.